I've had medical scares here. I've miscarried children here. 34, what I cannot forget. I thought that would be a really interesting thing to take on there. Like, yeah, there's different pockets of LA where my heart got broken or where I felt like immensely in love. And I wanted to talk about that too. And then even then, there's parts of the city where like death found me in different ways. And so all of that happened as I got older. And that's what I wanted to show, that pain and hurt and joy and love find us in different ways throughout the years in different parts of the city. 35, who I was before I knew what I know now, before these palm trees ever loved me back.
That originally aired on the public radio show and podcast Latino USA. And that's it for this week's Studio 360. Studio 360 is a production of PRI, Public Radio International, in association with Slate. Our executive producer is
Jocelyn Gonzalez.
Our senior editor is
Andrew Adam Newman.
Our show this week was mixed by
Whitney Jones.
Our producers are
Evan Chubb,
Lauren Hansen.
Sam Kim,
Zoe Saunders.
Tommy Bizzari.
Our production assistant is
Morgan Flannery.
And I am Kurt Anderson. Thank you very much for listening.
PRI, Public Radio International.
Next time in Studio 360, some role players at Comic-Con think that wearing brown makeup to be Luke Cage is the same as wearing green makeup as the Hulk.
For as many people that actually want to defend the practice of blackface, my skin is not your costume.
The role of race in role playing. Next time in Studio 360 from Public Radio International in association with Slate.
Support for WNYC comes from Cowan, Leibowitz & Latman, a law firm focusing on intellectual property, foreign trade, and litigation. Cowan Leibowitz assists clients in industries such as restaurants, breweries, finance, and fashion. More at CLL.com.
Stay tuned for Snap Judgments on 93.9 FM. Stories from beyond the Iron Curtain. Fresh Air is on AM 820. As the leaders of the two Koreas hold a historic summit, South Korea's Western allies are warning about giving too much to the dictatorship in Pyongyang. Tomorrow in Morning Edition, Seeking Peace on the Korean Peninsula. Join us for that story and the information you need to start your day on Morning Edition on WNYC. 65 degrees, rain tomorrow.
This is WNYC, FM, HD, and AM New York.
In 1963, Heinz falls in love with the wrong girl. She lives on the other side of an impenetrable wall in East Germany. No one can leave, but Heinz is in love. So he hatches a plan. He studies their impenetrable barrier, measures it. Then Heinz convinces his girlfriend to duck down in the back of his convertible. Heinz removes the car windshield. Still not enough, so he lets the air out of his tires. Heinz hops into the driver's seat, takes a deep breath, then races toward that barrier. On the other side, freedom. But if this doesn't work, well, it'd have been a good life. Snap Judgment proudly presents The Iron Curtain. Amazing tales from a line on the map, storytelling with the beat. Right after this break, stay tuned.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Spear. A jury has convicted comedian Bill Cosby of all 3 sexual assault charges he faced. The 80-year-old could spend the rest of his life in prison. Bobby Allen of member station WHYY reports the case was seen as the first celebrity trial in the Me Too era.
When the verdict of guilty on all 3 counts of aggravated indecent assault was read, Cosby didn't blink. He stared straight ahead. Cosby's main accuser, Andrea Constant, didn't react much either, but a high-pitched cry rang out across the packed courtroom. It was Cosby accuser Lily Bernard, so overcome with emotion she had to be escorted out of the courtroom. After the remain free on $1 million bond until his sentencing date. Bernard said the verdict delivered collective justice.
This jury has shown what the Me Too movement has saying is that women are worthy of being believed. And I thank the jury.
Cosby's defense team said, quote, "The fight is not over," and vowed to appeal. For NPR News, I'm Bobby Allen in Norristown.
EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt was grilled for more than 5 hours today in back-to-back congressional hearings. NPR Scott Horsley reports Pruitt is under the microscope for a series of ethical missteps.
Pruitt has drawn scrutiny for giving big pay raises to staffers over the objection of the White House, employing a costly 24-hour security detail, and a sweetheart housing arrangement in a condo owned by the wife of a lobbyist. Pruitt dismissed the allegations as half-truths and distortions, but Democratic lawmakers like John Sarbanes of Maryland kept the EPA chief on the defensive.
You've become the poster child for the abuse of public trust.
Some Republicans, especially those representing big fossil fuel states, defended Pruitt, saying critics are just trying to stop the EPA from rolling back Obama-era climate regulations. A few Republicans from swing districts joined the attacks on Pruitt and his free spending ways. Scott Horsley, NPR News, Washington.
President Trump today said his personal attorney Michael Cohen represents him in this crazy Stormy Daniels deal, going on to tell the show Fox and Friends that from what I see, he did absolutely nothing wrong. Trump spoke by phone to the Fox host, saying that as he has in the past, he has no knowledge of a $130,000 payment Cohen made to the porn actress supposedly in exchange for her silence about an affair she claims to have had with Trump. Cohen this week said he'll assert his constitutional right against self-incrimination in the case brought by Daniels, who's seeking to invalidate a confidentiality agreement. Teachers in Arizona taking a page from the playbook of some other recent actions as demonstrators started to stream out of the Capitol on the first day of a statewide walkout. Heat in the mid-90s sent some educators and supporters home, where their message was delivered. In addition to a 20% pay raise, they want more money for school spending. Stocks gained ground today. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 238 points. This is NPR.
This is WNYC in New York. I'm Lance Lucky. New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez has been severely admonished by the U.S. Senate's Ethics Committee for improperly accepting gifts from a Florida eye doctor. The Democrats survived a federal corruption trial last year, which ended in a hung jury, and they won a complete dismissal of the charges. The Ethics Committee has ordered Menendez to pay back all of the improper gifts he received from ophthalmologist Solomon Melgen, whom the senator describes as a longtime friend. In a statement, the panel said the senator demonstrated poor judgment. Menendez is running for re-election this November. Mayor de Blasio says his spending plans for New York will make it the fairest big city in America, even as money from Albany and Washington becomes scarcer. De Blasio is predicting an outlay of $89 billion in the coming fiscal year. Among his priorities, eliminating the backlog of 50,000 work orders for boilers, roofs, and other infrastructure for the city's crumbling public housing stock.
Facades of buildings and making them safe, lighting to make communities safer, a whole host of expenses covered by these investments.
The executive budget de Blasio shared today is not final. The mayor and the city council must agree on a spending plan by the end of June. De Blasio has been non-committal on some of the council's priorities, like a property tax rebate. The Port Authority has formally censured a former commissioner who was caught on camera delivering an expletive-laced tirade to police officers during a traffic stop in New Jersey. Karen Turner resigned last week as the agency's chief ethics officer just days before the video of her verbal encounter with police was released by the Tenafly Police Department. 65 now, increasing clouds tonight, 53 degrees, and rain tomorrow mainly in the late morning and early afternoon. WNYC.
Support for NPR comes from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, working alongside others to build a culture of health for all. More information at rwjf.org.
Midnight, 1963. There is only one possible way out of East Berlin. Checkpoint Charlie. There, officers, military personnel, local police with all manner of insignia patrol this tiny crossing. Hines knows the setup, but Hines notices that when the gate swings closed, there's a gap under the iron swing bar, and that gap gives him an idea. Actually, love gives Hines an idea. Marguerite, beautiful Marguerite, she's hiding in
You might think that to merit this kind of attention from the Stasi, Ulrike was some kind of super spy or a resistance fighter, hiding out in safe houses, sabotaging rail lines. But really, no. Ulrike's forms of resistance were actually pretty tame. She and her husband founded a dissident group called the Initiative for Peace and Human Rights. Their members hosted readings of banned books, distributed pamphlets calling for free elections, and organized protest marches. So why all this surveillance? Why didn't the Stasi just lock her up and throw away the key? Well, the problem, at least for the Stasi, was that Ulrike's dissident activities made her a little too famous, especially in the West. And East Germany didn't want the bad press. They wanted to seem like benevolent socialists, not a ruthless authoritarian regime. So, sure, they could occasionally arrest Ulrike, interrogate her, and do things like collect her smells, but in the end, they always had to let her go. So, when she wasn't stirring up trouble, Ulrike's life was, at least on the surface, pretty normal.
I came from a good home and worked for the Museum of German History. And there were presents for the children at Christmas, so I had a job, the kids, everything. But my husband and I were aware that every word, every private conversation, every argument over the washing up was being listened to and analyzed by the Stasi. Und das war schon. And that, kein gutes Gefühl, was not a good feeling. To not have any private space. All we could do was to try to carry on with life as though no one was listening. And I thought I had managed to cope with this quite well. But now I'm not so sure.
Ulrike explained that it was this psychological pressure, more than anything, that was the real reason for the surveillance. The Stasi always knew that it would be hard to lock her up, so instead, they were trying to essentially gaslight Ulrike and her friends, until they lost confidence and gave up. They were trying to drive her crazy, literally.
Das reibte sich ja ein. So there was a whole load of small problems in our life. And they were actually formally known as measures to spread uncertainty and insecurity. You can look it up on the internet.
Measures to spread uncertainty and insecurity?
Yeah. Yes, so zum Beispiel. For example, I'd come out of the shopping hall with my 2 kids and all my shopping bags and would sit the kids on the bike and then find that my tires were flat. Of course, if it had happened just once, you would think that you'd ridden over a piece of glass or that someone had played a prank on you. But because it happened so often, I began to suspect it was a Stasi strategy to unsettle us.
But Ulrike didn't dare talk about that stuff with anyone, because she remembered what had happened to her friend Karen.
Karin, die war Ärztin. Karen was a doctor, a pediatrician. She was extremely tidy, and she told us that someone had been in her flat and had switched the towels around. She always put the red towel to the right and the white one to the left. And when she got home, the white was on the right and the red on the left.
But Karen was a sensitive person, so everyone thought he was just being paranoid.
Was machte die Stasi? Why would the Stasi go into people's flats to switch around their towels?
So warum sollte sie das machen?
It would be too stupid.
Es war aber...
But actually, it was part of their plan. They knew she was psychologically unstable, and they also realized that if Karin went around talking about things like that, she would become less credible. And eventually, she was unable to work. Sie ist daran zerbrochen, and it broke her.
So when the Stasi kept puncturing Ulrike's tires, she was careful not to talk about it too much.
In case people said that I was paranoid. Because, of course, we didn't have any proof.
And even if she did have someone to tell, a friend perhaps, there was always the problem that that friend might be an informer. Someone who had been planted or turned by the Stasi to spy on her.
For example, with a colleague of mine.
Konnte ja nicht sicher sein.
I just couldn't be certain. But sometimes I'd have this inkling.
Inwiefern? In what way?
Seine
Wohnung sah
His
anders.
apartment looked different, was decorated differently.
So, als wenn
It was as though someone else, someone from the Stasi, had decorated his apartment for him.
Also das war keine Individualität und nichts.
There was just no individuality, nothing.
Naja,
Anyway, I was very anxious.
habe ich große Ängste gehabt. Ulrike's life was like a play being watched by the Stasi, staged by the Stasi, even cast by the Stasi. What was real? Who was real? It was these lingering suspicions and the not knowing more than anything that drove her crazy. She didn't even know who was in charge of her case. She never met them. What she did know was that somewhere inside the Stasi headquarters was a file with her name on it that had the answers. And sometimes she fantasized about absurd and dangerous things.
I'd been dreaming about having the opportunity to view my file for a long time. I wondered whether I might be able to find a rogue state security agent whom I could maybe meet with and who would be able to bring it to me. I was really curious about what it would contain, what the Stasi's plans were, how much they had heard, but also to what extent events had been manipulated by them, and to what extent I had been able to direct my own life.
And this would have been Ulrike's life, trying to act normal while being constantly watched, and wondering the whole time about what was real and what was fake, forever. But then, after almost a decade of round-the-clock surveillance, something happened that would turn everything upside down.
A prospect that no one could have predicted a year ago or even a month ago.
This has been a city physically divided for 28 years. Our top story. The Iron Curtain between East Germany and West Berlin has come tumbling down. East Germany announced today it is opening its borders, allowing its citizens to build anywhere they wish.
On November 9th, 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. 2 months later, the Stasi's headquarters were overrun by protesters. Their officer corps was disbanded, their listening devices disconnected, the tape recorders stopped. Their entire surveillance state disappeared overnight. And as for Ulrike, who had dreamt of getting to see her Stasi file, she was about to get a wish.
kann mich an den Tag noch sehr gut erinnern. I can remember that day very well. I was full of anticipation. Now, finally, all this secret knowledge was going to be brought into the light of day.
In the winter of 1992, at the invitation of a special government commission, Ulrike and her husband, along with a few other dissidents who had been under particularly extensive surveillance, all walked together into an austere gray building. And then they were ushered into this big room and sat down at a little table in a long line of tables. And that's when the staff walked in with the files.
Und wir konnten durchaus damit rechnen. And obviously we assumed that all of this surveillance would be formally recorded and filed somewhere. But still we were strangely taken aback when an entire cart was pushed up to our table.
Not a file, not a box. An entire cart with boxes worth of files.
Mit solch einer Fülle von... I hadn't anticipated such a huge volume of material. Ich hatte eigentlich keine Vorstellung. I couldn't really imagine it. Trolleys full of files.
When we told you that Ulrike was one of the most surveilled people in East Germany, she didn't actually know that until now. When she opened the folders, it seemed as if the Stasi must have recorded everything she had ever done, almost down to the minute, where she was, what she said, what she ate for lunch that day.
They even had recorded what time the light went out in the evening and what time we got up in the morning. So then my husband and me began to leaf feverishly through these mountains of folders, and we read and read and read.
Back in her apartment, all these years later, Ulrike takes down a carefully labeled 3-inch binder from her shelf. It's one of over 60 she's been sent over the years. Achso, das ist die Kurzfassung, ja.
So this is, so to speak, a summary of my life. And if I want to know, for example, what happened on October 15th, 1986, I can look in here.
The thing Ulrike really cares about is not what's written in the reports, but who wrote them. Because remember, for years she had never been sure which of her friends had been informants, basically ratting her out and passing their private conversations on to the Stasi. When she opened her file, she got to find out who had been a true friend and who had betrayed her.
Bericht an Franz.
Here's a report by the informant Franz about a party we attended from the 31st of August 1988.
Berichte, da gibt es einen Bericht, zwei Berichte, drei.
There's 1, 2, 3 reports on that one party alone.
Ja, 3 Berichte.
Wow, was sind das für Zeugen hier? And who are the witnesses recorded here?
Die unter anderem da.
That's everyone else who attended. I'll show you now how many of them were informants.
Grimm nicht.
Not Grimm, not Böttcher, not Weissung.
Böhme war Spitzel.
Böhmer was an informant.
Wetzky.
Harz was an informant. Wetzky was an informant. Pavlicek was an informant. Dietrich was an informant.
Also von 1.
So out of 13,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Spitzel.
5 were informants.
Wow, fast die Hälfte.
So
Almost half. Und was war das für eine...
Aufgeführt, der IMB Wolf war auch.
Oh, here's another one mentioned, Wolf. He was also an informant. So 6 informants in total.
Also das war die Initiative...
So that was in the most radical opposition group. And it was infiltrated by a huge number of informants.
Sind ungefähr, also insgesamt...
There's about, all in all, over 80 informants in these files. In all the files.
That's 80 separate people, 80, who were informing on Ulrike. She says that in the case of people who were clearly coerced into becoming informants, she's happy to forgive them and move on.
Aber dann gibt's andere Berichte.
But then there are other reports which emit denunciatory zeal, which are nasty and mean-spirited, and where you suspect a pleasure in causing harm. So some I can accept and continue to maintain some level of contact, but with others
Habe ich einfach gar kein Interesse mehr.
I'm just not interested anymore.
Und wer ist das, der diesen... What about the informant who wrote this report we're reading? Franz?
Franz, das war sein Deckname.
His code name was Franz, and I read several reports by him on that first day in the archives. And it was clear that I had had a close relationship with this person. But who could he be? Well, eventually I found a report which allowed me to conclusively identify him.